All right, so today we're diving into something I think a lot of our listeners probably struggle with, and that's achieving fluency in English. And we're going to be dissecting a motivational speech that I found. It's packed with good stuff, but I really want to kind of go beyond the surface and really unpack what makes these strategies tick, you know?
Yeah, totally. A pep talk is one thing, but like understanding the why behind the advice can really make it stick.
Exactly. So the speaker kicks off with this big idea like fluency is a journey, not a destination. They even compare it to like a tree growing. But honestly, that metaphor feels a bit overused, don't you think?
It does kind of, but the speech actually shares this powerful story about a student who was like heartbroken because she kept forgetting words.
Oh.
And the speaker, instead of being like, oh, just try harder or whatever, said something super interesting like, fluent speakers don't know every single word either.
Wow.
It's more about like getting your message across even with those gaps.
That's such a game changer, isn't it? It reminds me of all that research about how babies learn language. They don't wait for perfect grammar. They just like jump in and make a ton of mistakes, and somehow it works.
It's called desirable difficulty.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Our brains actually learn better when things aren't too easy.
Oh.
When we struggle a bit, we create those stronger neural connections.
Yeah,
I
see.
Like, think about it. If you could speak perfectly from day one, would you even remember the process?
That's a good point.
Right.
So those frustrating moments when you're like searching for the right word, maybe they're actually good for us.
Exactly. They force our brains to be flexible and creative.
Yeah.
Which is what you need to be a fluent speaker,
Right.
The speech also mentions the importance of making practice fun.
Yeah.
Which, okay, we've all heard that before.
Yeah.
But there's this really concrete example they give about this girl who was struggling with traditional methods like textbooks and stuff.
Yeah.
And she started listening to music and singing along. And suddenly her pronunciation, even her grammar, improved dramatically.
I've heard similar things from friends who are learning, other languages. Like it's like music unlocks a different part of the brain.
It does. It engages our emotional and rhythmic centers, which are all tied to like memory and language processing.
Wow.
And when we enjoy something, we're more likely to do it consistently.
So true.
So think about your hobbies. How could you weave English into them? Maybe it's watching cooking shows or playing online games or even like reading fan fiction.
I love that idea. It's not just about studying. It's about like living the language.
Exactly.
But here's where it gets tricky, making mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone says don't be afraid, but that's easier said than done.
Absolutely. But the speech tells this great story about a student who was terrified to speak up in class.
Oh.
And finally she took the leap, made a bunch of errors, and everyone laughed, including her.
Oh.
But that experience, even though it was embarrassing, was the turning point.
Yeah.
It showed her that mistakes weren't fatal.
It's funny how our brains learn more from errors than successes, right?
Totally.
If we're always getting it right, there's no reason for our neural pathways to rewire themselves.
Exactly. It's like driving. If you'd ever hit a pothole, you wouldn't learn to adjust your steering.
Right.
So next time you make a language mistake, try reframing it. Instead of feeling embarrassed, think, great, my brain just got to work out.
I like that.
Right.
Now, while making mistakes is crucial, training our ears to truly understand fluent speech, I think, is equally important.
Yeah.
The speaker emphasizes the power of listening as much, if not more, than speaking.
Mm.
And that surprised me. I thought, isn't speaking the ultimate goal?
It is, but think about how we learn our native language.
Yeah.
We spend years listening before we utter a word.
That's true.
Absorbing those subtle patterns, the rhythm, the intonation, all without even realizing it. It's like downloading the operating system before you can run any programs.
So all that time I spent binge watching shows in English, even if I didn't understand everything was actually beneficial.
It was laying the foundation.
Wow.
And here's where it gets really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Our research shows that our brains are constantly trying to predict what comes next in a sentence. So the more we listen to fluent speech, the better we get at making those predictions.
Okay.
Which ultimately leads to smoother, more natural speech.
So listening is key mistakes are our friends.
Mm-hmm.
What else does this fluency toolkit need? Well, the speaker says you need a strong why. They give an example of a student who was motivated by her dream to travel.
Right.
But isn't that a bit cliche?
It is, but here's the twist.
Yeah.
The speaker doesn't just say, have a dream.
Yeah.
They advocate for setting SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Right.
So instead of just saying, I want to travel, this student planned a trip to London 6 months out,
Wow.
booked her flight, and used that deadline to fuel her studies.
That's brilliant. It takes a vague aspiration and turns it into, like, concrete action.
Yeah.
I remember when I was learning Spanish, I signed up for a dance class where everyone spoke Spanish.
Oh, nice.
And suddenly I had, like, a real reason to improve, you know?
Yeah.
Not just for a grade in school.
It's the power of a SMART goal.
Mm-hmm.
It taps into our intrinsic motivation, that drive that comes from within, and it helps us track progress.
Yeah.
Instead of feeling lost in this vast ocean of learning English, you have these smaller, achievable milestones along the way.
I'm starting to see why this speech resonated with so many people. It's not just about the tips, it's about the mindset.
Yeah, for sure.
But we've only scratched the surface.
We have.
The speech goes on to outline a bunch of additional techniques that I'm dying to unpack.
Yeah, it's like the speaker has anticipated every single roadblock a language learner might face.
Right.
And offered a solution. And some of these solutions are like surprisingly simple but effective.
Like what? Give me an example. I'm all ears.
Okay, well, one that really caught my eye is this idea of recording yourself speaking.
Yeah.
Now, I know hearing your own voice can be cringeworthy.
Oh, tell me about it.
Right.
Right.
I still haven't gotten used to hearing myself on this podcast.
But there's a reason why singers and actors use this technique.
Yeah.
It provides, like, objective feedback.
Okay.
You might think you sound fluent, but then you hear your pacing, your pronunciation, those hesitations, and it reveals, like, areas for improvement that you might not even be aware of.
It's like looking in a mirror, but for your voice.
Right.
And the speaker actually suggests practicing in front of a mirror, too.
Oh, yeah.
And not just to check for spinach in your teeth, but to observe, like, your expressions, your gestures. Isn't that a bit, like, theatrical?
It might seem that way, but fluency isn't just about words. It's about conveying meaning through all channels.
I see.
Your body language,
Yeah.
your facial expressions, they all play a role.
Right.
Think about, like, charismatic speakers you've seen, you know?
Yeah.
They command attention with their whole presence, not just their vocabulary.
So it's not just about what you say, but how you say it.
I like that, and it ties back to that idea of fluency being about communication, not perfection.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this leads to another really intriguing technique, teaching others. Now, you might think, wait, I'm not fluent yet. How can I teach?
Right.
But the speech argues that, like, explaining concepts, even simple ones,
Yeah.
to someone else solidifies your understanding.
Isn't that like a core principle in education?
It is.
To teach is to learn twice. I've definitely noticed that when I try to explain something complex to someone, I end up understanding it better myself.
It's like you're building a mental map.
Yeah.
You know, when you have to, like, guide someone else through the terrain,
Yeah.
you become more aware of the landmarks and pathways.
Oh, I see.
And it challenges you to find different ways to explain things.
Right.
To adapt to different learning styles.
Which in turn makes you a more adaptable and fluent communicator.
Exactly.
I'm starting to think that this speech is less about mastering English and more about, like, mastering communication itself.
I think you're onto something.
Yeah.
Fluency isn't just for language learners.
Yeah.
It's a valuable skill in any field.
Okay, so we've got recording ourselves, we've got practicing our nonverbals, we've got teaching others, but what about those moments when we hit a wall, you know?
Yeah.
When our brains are fried and we just can't absorb another grammar rule.
Totally.
The speaker doesn't shy away from this. They actually emphasize the importance of taking breaks.
Yes.
And not just like 5-minute Instagram breaks, but real guilt-free time off.
Yeah.
Why is that so crucial?
It's like anything in life, you can't sprint a marathon. Our brains need time to consolidate information to make those neural connections stick.
Right.
Think about it. After a day of intense learning, don't you often find that things click into place like the next day?
Yes.
After you've rested?
That's so true. It's like my brain needs to sleep on it. Maybe that's why cramming for exams never really works.
Yeah.
You might memorize the information, but you don't truly understand it.
Exactly. And there's actually like a fascinating neurological basis for this. When we learn something new, our brains create these weak connections. It's through sleep, through relaxation,
Yeah.
that these connections solidify and become part of our long-term memory.
So those breaks aren't just about avoiding burnout. They're essential for learning.
They are.
I don't know about you, but I find that taking breaks is often harder than, like, pushing through.
It is.
It's easy to feel guilty, like I should be constantly studying.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on how to embrace those breaks without feeling like I'm slacking off?
Well, the speaker encourages us to use those breaks to engage with English in like fun, creative ways.
Yeah.
So instead of like scrolling through social media, maybe you listen to an English podcast like this one, or watch a movie, read a book.
Yeah.
The key is to make it enjoyable, to tap into that intrinsic motivation we talked about.
So it's not really a break from English, it's a break from traditional studying.
Exactly.
It's a cross-training for your brain.
Yeah.
Speaking of creative approaches, the speaker also suggests like writing short stories, singing songs, even making videos in English.
Yeah.
This might sound a bit out there, but it goes back to that idea of like engaging different parts of our brain.
He does.
When we use language creatively, we're not just memorizing rules. We're experimenting, we're playing, we're expressing ourselves.
Yeah.
And that can be so powerful for fluency development.
It can.
I remember when I was learning French in school, we had to like write and perform skits.
Oh, fun.
It was terrifying at the time.
Yeah.
But I'll never forget those phrases and expressions, like the emotional connection embedded them in my memory.
Exactly. And it ties back to that concept of flow state.
Oh, yeah?
You know, that state of deep engagement where time seems to fly by.
Yeah.
Because we're so absorbed in what we're doing.
Totally.
When we find those activities that bring us into that flow state, learning becomes effortless, almost addictive.
It's like the difference between forcing yourself to run on a treadmill and like losing yourself in a dance class.
Right.
Both are forms of exercise,
right,
but one is a lot more enjoyable.
For sure.
And you're more likely to stick with it.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got breaks, we've got creative expression, we've got teaching others what else is in this fluency treasure chest.
Well, the speaker also emphasizes the importance of setting a routine.
Okay.
Even if it's just for like 15 or 30 minutes each day, having that dedicated time slot for language practice can make a world of difference.
Isn't that true for any skill?
It is.
It's about building those habits, making it a part of your daily life. I find that even on days when I don't feel like studying, if I just sit down for like 15 minutes, I often end up doing more.
Right.
It's like overcoming that initial inertia.
Exactly. It's like building momentum.
Yeah.
Once you get started, it's easier to keep going.
And the speaker reminds us that consistency is key. Fluency doesn't happen overnight.
It doesn't.
It's a gradual process built upon these small, consistent efforts.
Small, consistent efforts.
It's like that saying, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And sometimes it's about taking those steps even when you don't feel like it.
It is, but it's also about celebrating those steps along the way.
Yes.
You know, every new word learned, every conversation navigated, every moment of clarity is a cause for celebration.
I love that.
It's those little wins that keep us motivated and fuel our progress.
Now, we talked earlier about the importance of listening,
Right.
but the speaker goes even deeper and suggests that we pay attention to how fluent speakers speak,
Right.
not just what they say.
It's about observing their style, their intonation, their pacing. It's about finding role models, you know, those who embody the kind of fluency that you aspire to.
So we're not just absorbing the words, we're absorbing the music of the language.
Exactly.
I like that analogy. It's like learning to play an instrument. You can learn all the notes.
Yeah.
But to truly master it, you need to study the masters to feel the rhythm and the soul of the music.
And just like with music, fluency has its own rhythm and flow. It's about learning to ride that wave, to let the language flow through you naturally.
Now, we've talked a lot about the positive aspects of language learning, but what about those inevitable moments of frustration, you know, when you feel stuck, when you make the same mistakes over and over, when you just want to throw in the towel?
Yeah, the speaker doesn't sugarcoat it.
Yeah.
They acknowledge that there will be challenges, there will be moments of doubt,
Right.
but they remind us that even fluent speakers don't get it right all the time.
That's comforting to hear.
Yeah.
I think we often put fluent speakers on a pedestal, assuming they're just effortlessly gliding through conversations.
Right.
But the reality is everyone stumbles. Everyone hesitates. Everyone has their own language pet peeves.
Everyone does. Fluency isn't about being perfect. It's about being resilient. It's about bouncing back from those stumbles, learning from those mistakes, and embracing the journey with all its ups and downs.
And speaking of stumbles, the speaker has some great advice on how to handle those moments when you forget a word, when your mind goes blank, when you just can't seem to articulate what you want to say.
Yeah, they suggest pausing, taking a breath. Maybe trying to describe the word you're looking for in a different way.
Right.
The key is to maintain the flow of communication, you know, to avoid those awkward silences that can make us feel self-conscious.
It's like improvising in jazz.
Yes.
You miss a note, you don't stop the music.
Right.
You find a way to weave it back in.
Exactly.
You keep the rhythm going.
And this is where mindset comes in.
Mm-hmm.
The speaker emphasizes the importance of having a positive attitude.
Yeah.
Of viewing mistakes as learning opportunities rather than failures.
Yeah.
It's about embracing the journey with all its ups and downs.
Right.
And focusing on the progress you're making, no matter how small.
And sometimes it's about stepping outside your comfort zone.
Yeah.
About seeking out those opportunities to practice in real-life situations.
Yeah.
Remember that student who was comfortable speaking English in class?
Yeah.
But felt shy outside of school?
Yeah, the speaker encouraged her to challenge herself.
Yeah.
To strike up conversations with people outside of her usual circle.
Mm-hmm.
At first it was nerve-wracking, but with each interaction she gained more confidence and fluency.
It's like anything else. The more you do it, the easier it gets.
It does.
And the more you expose yourself to different accents, different speaking styles, the more adaptable you become.
Right. It's like training your ear to recognize the different dialects of fluency.
I like that.
And finally, we come back to that idea of observing fluent speakers.
Mm-hmm.
The speakers suggest paying attention to their style, their intonation, their pacing.
Right.
It's about finding role models.
Yeah.
Those who embody the kind of fluency that you aspire to.
Soaking it all in like a sponge.
Exactly. And just like with any skill, the more we observe and emulate those who excel,
Yeah.
the faster we'll progress.
Wow. The speech is like a fluency masterclass.
It is.
I feel like I've learned so much just by listening to it.
Me too. And I think it's a great reminder that fluency isn't some like magical talent that some people are born with.
Right.
It's a skill that can be developed with dedication, the right strategies, and a whole lot of heart.
And a dash of fun, of course.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into the world of fluency.
It has.
But there's one element of this whole discussion that I find particularly intriguing. The speaker never once mentions apps or online resources.
Right.
It's all about real-world practice immersion and connecting with the language on like a human level.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder, have we become too reliant on technology for language learning?
It's a valid question.
Yeah.
On the one hand, like those apps and websites offer, structured lessons, personalized feedback, and gamified exercises, which can be incredibly motivating, especially for beginners.
Right.
But on the other hand, they can create a kind of bubble,
Mm-hmm.
isolating us from the messy, unpredictable beauty of like real-world language use.
It's like the difference between learning to cook from a recipe book
Yes.
versus like jumping in and experimenting in the kitchen,
Totally.
You might make some mistakes, but you also develop a more intuitive feel for the ingredients, the techniques, the flavors.
And let's not forget the social element.
Right.
Language is, at its core, a tool for connection,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those real-world interactions, those moments of shared laughter, those misunderstandings that lead to deeper understanding,
Mm-hmm.
those are experiences that no app can replicate.
You're making me think back to my own language learning journey.
Oh, yeah.
I spent years studying French in school, but it wasn't until I lived in France, immersed in the language and the culture, that I truly became fluent.
It's about those aha moments.
Yeah.
Those instances where a phrase suddenly clicks into place, not because you memorized it, but because you experienced it in context.
So where does that leave us? Are language learning apps good or bad?
I don't think it's about one versus the other.
Yeah. Right.
It's about finding the right balance. Those apps can be fantastic for building vocabulary, for practicing grammar rules, for getting that initial foundation.
Right.
But to truly become fluent, to develop that intuitive grasp of the language, we need to step outside the digital bubble and engage with the language in the real world.
It's like using training wheels on a bike.
Yes.
They're great for getting started, but eventually you need to take them off and experience the thrill of riding on your own.
And just like with riding a bike,
Yeah.
fluency requires practice, persistence, and a willingness to embrace those inevitable stumbles along the way.
So as you continue your own journey towards fluency in English, I encourage you to think about what tools and approaches resonate most with you.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to experiment, try different methods, explore different resources, and find what works best for your learning style.
Find what works for you.
Maybe it's finding a language partner to practice with.
Yeah.
Maybe it's joining an English conversation group. Maybe it's challenging yourself to watch a movie without subtitle. Maybe it's using a combination of online tools and real-world experiences.
The key is to find that sweet spot. That balance between structured learning and immersive practice.
Right.
Between digital tools and human connection.
And above all, remember that fluency is not a destination, it's a journey.
Yes, sir.
It's a lifelong process of discovery, of growth, of connecting with the language and the world around you in new and exciting ways.
And with that, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of fluency. We hope this exploration has given you some new insights, some fresh perspectives, and perhaps even a renewed sense of motivation on your own language learning adventure.
Until next time, keep practicing, keep exploring, and keep embracing the beautiful complexity of the English language. Happy learning.